Dr. Madison Hayes was dreaming of her grandmother's old pocket watch when the pounding on her door jolted her awake. The bedside clock cast an angry red 3:17 a.m. into the darkness of her Vermont farmhouse. Another round of thunderous knocking followed, accompanied by voices calling her name. "Dr. Hayes, this is Agent Morrison with the Department of Defense. We need you to come with us immediately." Throwing on a sweater over her pajamas, she opened the door to find three figures in dark suits, their government vehicles casting long shadows across her frost-covered lawn. The lead agent's expression made it clear this wasn't a request. What could the Doty possibly want with a paranormal researcher at 3 in the morning? She asked, already knowing she wouldn't get a straight answer. "Ma'am, we need your expertise. Now." Agent Morrison's tone carried an edge of barely contained urgency that made Hayes' skin prickle. The drive was a blur of dark roads and security checkpoints, ending at a facility she'd never known existed, buried in the Green Mountains. As they hurried her through sterile corridors, she caught glimpses of rooms filled with military personnel hovering over screens and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. They finally stopped in what appeared to be a conference room. The wall-mounted screens displayed what looked like transmission data, star charts, and was that a collection of paranormal encounter reports. General Laura Chen stood at the head of the table, surrounded by a mix of military brass and civilians who Hayes recognized from various scientific institutions. The tension in the room was palpable. "Dr. Hayes," the general began without preamble, "what you're about to hear is classified at the highest levels. 6 hours ago, we intercepted a transmission of alien origin." She paused, letting that sink in. "But that's not why you're here. We're here because of what they're interested in." The general nodded to a technician who brought up a series of decoded transmissions. Hayes' eyes widened as she read. These weren't the typical first contact protocols she'd imagined. Instead, the aliens were discussing Earth's quantum anomalies and reality distortions, terms that made Hayes' academic work in paranormal research suddenly feel far more relevant. "They've been monitoring this," another scientist spoke up, Dr. James Weber from SETI. "Not our technology, not our weapons, not our resources. They've been collecting our ghost stories, our urban legends, every documented supernatural encounter for the past century." Hayes felt a laugh bubble up in her throat. "Are you telling me that advanced alien civilizations are afraid of our ghost stories?" "Not afraid, Doctor. Fascinated. And deeply concerned." The general brought up more data. "They've been detecting what they call reality fractures around our planet. Phenomena they've never encountered in thousands of explored worlds. And according to these transmissions, they're coming here to investigate." Hayes thought of her grandmother's stories, of the things that went bump in the night, of every unexplained experience she documented in her research. "They think we're dangerous, don't they?" "We think they think we're impossible," Weber corrected. "Their science says these phenomena can't exist. Yet here we are, an entire species living alongside them like they're normal." The general straightened. "Dr. Hayes, you're one of the few academics who's approached paranormal research with scientific rigor. When they arrive, and they will arrive soon, we need you to help us understand why they're so interested in the things that go bump in our night." As if on cue, every screen in the room flickered. A new transmission appeared, and Hayes felt her heart skip a beat as she read the alien text. "Advance team approaching. Prepare your anomaly experts. We have questions about your ghosts." Hayes thought again of her grandmother's pocket watch, how it still ticked despite having no working mechanisms inside. She had a feeling she knew exactly why these aliens were so interested in humanity's supernatural experiences, and why they were right to be concerned. The alien ship materialized above Salem at dawn, a crystalline structure that seemed to bend light around its edges. Dr. Hayes stood in the shadow of the Crowninshield House, a colonial-era mansion that had been hastily converted into a joint human-alien research base. Her hand clutched her grandmother's pocket watch, its impossible ticking a reminder of why she was here. The archivist approaches, announced Colonel Weber, watching a sleek transport vessel descend from the main ship. Dr. Hayes, remember, you're humanity's expert on unusual phenomena. The transport landed with impossible grace on the mansion's lawn, frost crystallizing beneath it. The being that emerged wasn't the gray humanoid Hayes had half expected. Instead, Zix 427 appeared as a shifting column of iridescent light, contained within what looked like a sophisticated environmental suit. "Greetings, Dr. Madison Hayes." Zix 427's translated voice emerged as a pleasant tenor. "We have studied your research extensively. Your methodologies in documenting quantum anomalies are uniquely thorough." Before Hayes could respond, a child's voice rang out from the mansion's upper window. "Hey, mister, are you here to talk to Elizabeth too?" Everyone froze. Hayes recognized Tommy, the groundskeeper's 8-year-old son. Zix 427's containment suit flickered with patterns Hayes would later learn indicated extreme distress. "Elizabeth," the alien researcher questioned. "Yeah, she died here in 1784. She likes to play marbles in the attic." Tommy's casual tone made the alien's lights pulse rapidly. "She says your glowy suit is pretty." The alien's translation matrix produced what sounded like a strangled gasp. Every piece of their advanced scanning equipment suddenly sparked, displays flickering with impossible readings. Hayes watched as Zix 427's composure crumbled in real time. This cannot." The alien scientist's translator glitched. "Our instruments detect no other sentient presence, yet the child speaks of direct communication with a non-corporeal entity. And our equipment." Hayes felt a familiar cold spot pass through the room. The kind that had fascinated her since childhood. That would be Elizabeth. She's always been curious about new visitors. The alien's next words came out as a whisper. "You can sense it too." "Most humans can, to some degree," Hayes explained, watching as more alien researchers emerged from the transport, their instruments going haywire. "We've evolved alongside these phenomena. They're as natural to us as gravity." The next few hours were chaos. The aliens attempted to set up increasingly sophisticated detection grids throughout the house, only to watch each one fail spectacularly. Their quantum containment fields shattered against forces they couldn't even properly detect, all while Tommy casually played marbles in the attic with his centuries-dead friend. "Impossible," Zix 427 kept repeating, examining yet another failed sensor array. "Our civilization has mapped dark matter, harnessed quantum entanglement, but we cannot even properly detect what your children interact with daily." Hayes picked up one of Tommy's marbles from the floor. It had rolled down the stairs impossibly slowly, defying gravity. "Maybe that's the problem. You're trying to detect and contain something that's meant to be experienced." The alien scientist turned to her, lights pulsing with what she was beginning to recognize as intense scientific curiosity. "Dr. Hayes, how does your species maintain sanity while constantly exposed to such reality distortions?" She smiled, thinking of all the ghost stories, all the unexplained phenomena that humans had simply learned to live alongside. "Who says we're sane by your definition? Maybe what you call sanity is just limited perception." As if to punctuate her point, every light in the mansion flickered, and a child's laughter, not Tommy's, echoed through the halls. Hayes watched as the alien researchers huddled together, their instruments useless, while she felt only the familiar comfort of a house well haunted. She had a feeling this was just the beginning of helping these advanced beings understand that some things couldn't be measured, only experienced. And humans, through whatever cosmic joke or evolutionary quirk, had become masters of experiencing the impossible. The Anderson family's farmhouse in Iowa seemed like an odd second stop on their research tour, but Hayes had insisted. As their transport descended toward the modest 2-story home, Zix 427's containment suit pulsed with uncertainty. "You claim this location harbors one of the most active quantum anomalies in North America," the alien researcher said, "yet I detect no unusual energy signatures." Hayes smiled as Sarah Anderson, a middle-aged woman in a flower-dusted apron, waved from the porch. Just wait. Inside, the farmhouse was warm and smelled of fresh-baked cookies. Sarah's husband Tom sat at the kitchen table, casually completing a crossword puzzle, while cabinet doors opened and closed by themselves behind him. Neither Anderson showed the slightest concern. "Oh, that's just Chuck," Sarah explained, noting Zix 427's violent color fluctuations. "He gets restless around new folks. Been with us since we bought the place in '92. Chuck." The alien's translator struggled with the confusion in its tone. "The poltergeist," Tom said without looking up from his puzzle. "Bit of a troublemaker, but he's family at this point. Keeps the mice out, at least." A cookie jar slid across the counter of its own accord. Sarah sighed. "Chuck, honey, we have guests. Mind your manners." Hayes watched as her alien colleagues' instruments once again failed to capture readings of what was clearly happening before them. The devices registered nothing while dishes floated, temperatures fluctuated, and strange knocking sounds echoed through the walls. "How?" Zix 427 seemed to struggle for words. "How do you maintain normal cognitive functions in such conditions?" Sarah laughed, swatting away a floating whisk. "Normal. Chuck's been here longer than our kids. He helped me teach them to walk, would catch them before they could fall. Sure, he has his moody days, but who doesn't?" As if on cue, a low grumble resonated through the house. Tom finally looked up from his crossword. "He's just showing off now. Chuck, remember what happened last time you got too excited around visitors?" The phenomena immediately calmed, though Hayes noticed a few cookies had mysteriously vanished from the cooling rack. "Fascinating," one of the junior alien researchers noted. "They've established communication protocols with an entity we cannot even prove exists." Hayes watched as Sarah went about her baking, occasionally asking Chuck to hand her ingredients from high shelves, while the aliens huddled in a corner, their sophisticated sensors useless against the casual impossibility of the scene. "Dr. Hayes," Zix 427 pulled her aside, its lights pulsing in what she now recognized as distress. "Our civilization has encountered over 3,000 sentient species. None of them simply coexist with reality distortions as humans do. How do you prevent mass psychological trauma?" Hayes picked up a warm cookie, watching as an unseen force arranged the remaining ones into a smiley face pattern. "Maybe because we never saw them as distortions. They're just part of life, like weather or seasons or family pets. Your species categorizes a quantum anomaly capable of manipulating physical matter as a pet." The alien's lights nearly strobed with incredulity. "Well," Hayes grinned as she heard Chuck start to play with the wind chimes in the next room, creating an eerily beautiful melody. "When they help with the housework and babysitting, why wouldn't we?" Later, as they prepared to leave, Sarah pressed a container of cookies into Hayes' hands. "Chuck insists. He likes you. Says you feel like the old days, when more people could sense him properly." Hayes noticed Zix 427 twitch at this casual mention of direct communication with the invisible entity. She had a feeling the aliens were only beginning to understand that humanity's relationship with the supernatural wasn't just acceptance, it was symbiosis. As their transport lifted off, Hayes could have sworn she saw Chuck waving goodbye from an upstairs window. The aliens studiously avoided looking at the house, their instruments still smoking slightly from their failed attempts to quantify the unquantifiable. The abandoned street Mary's Asylum loomed against the Montana twilight, its Victorian architecture a stark silhouette against gathering storm clouds. Dr. Hayes stood in what had once been the main treatment room, surrounded by the aliens' most sophisticated scanning equipment yet. "The breakthrough came from your grandmother's watch," Zix 427 explained, its containment suit glowing softly in the dim light. "We detected a quantum frequency we'd never seen before, one that matches certain patterns in human brainwave activity." Hayes held up the watch, its hand still moving despite its gutted mechanics. "You think this frequency is why we can perceive things you can't?" We believe it's more than that. The alien researcher manipulated a holographic display. Humans don't just perceive these phenomena. You resonate with them. Your consciousness operates partially on this frequency, has evolved alongside it. Thunder rolled outside as Hayes processed this. You're saying we're naturally tuned to whatever this is. Precisely. And we've developed a way to. Zix 427's explanation cut off as every piece of equipment in the room suddenly activated at once, displays showing readings that made the alien research team pulse with alarm. Hayes felt it too, that familiar electric sensation that had guided her research for years. The temperature dropped sharply, and she could see her breath in the air. We're not alone anymore. The aliens' instruments were going haywire, recording energy signatures that their science said were impossible. Hayes watched as shapes began to form in the corners of her vision. The kind of shadows she'd learned long ago weren't really shadows at all. Dr. Hayes, Zix 427's voice carried an edge of panic. Our readings suggest multiple reality fractures forming, but we cannot. They're curious about you, Hayes interrupted, watching the shadows take more definite form. They've never seen anything quite like you either. The alien researchers huddled together as their equipment began to spark and smoke. Through their translators came a mix of scientific observations and what sounded suspiciously like prayers to various cosmic entities. Hayes closed her eyes, letting that familiar frequency wash over her. When she opened them again, the room had changed. The shadows had solidified into figures. Former patients, staff members, fragments of history caught in an endless loop. But there was something else too, something newer. They're trying to communicate with you, she told the aliens, but you're not listening the right way. Your instruments are getting in the way. Getting in the. Zix 427 stopped as its containment suit flickered, responding to energies its sensors couldn't properly process. How do we listen? Hayes smiled, remembering her grandmother's lessons. Stop trying to measure and start trying to feel. They're not data to be collected. They're experiences to be shared. What followed was perhaps the strangest teaching session in human history. Hayes guided the alien researchers through the basics of what humans had known instinctively for millennia. How to sense the subtle changes in the air, how to interpret the patterns in seemingly random sounds, how to recognize the difference between ordinary shadows and something more. Gradually, painfully, the aliens began to perceive fragments of what Hayes could see clearly. Their terror turned to wonder as they realized that what they'd classified as reality distortions were actually layers of existence their science had never been equipped to understand. This changes everything, Zix 427 whispered as it watched a spectral nurse walk through a wall, its sensors finally calibrated to detect a fraction of the phenomenon. Your species hasn't just been living alongside these quantum anomalies. You've been teaching each other. Hayes thought of her grandmother's stories, of countless generations of humans who'd learned to navigate these invisible currents of reality. Maybe that's why we see ghosts. Not because we're haunted, but because we're having a conversation that's been going on since the first humans looked into the dark and realized something was looking back. Outside, the storm broke, and lightning illuminated the room in stark flashes. In those moments of brilliance, even the aliens could see clearly what Hayes had always known was there, that humanity had never really been alone in the universe, even before we looked to the stars. This is incredibly dangerous. Dr. Hayes stood before the gleaming array of alien technology in their orbital research station. You can't just replicate human brainwave patterns and expect to handle the consequences. Zix 427's containment suit pulsed with a mix of excitement, and what Hayes had learned was their species' equivalent of academic arrogance. We've studied the frequency extensively. Our simulations suggest we can replicate human perception capabilities in a controlled environment. Hayes glanced at her grandmother's watch. It had started ticking backwards the moment they'd brought it aboard the station. That's exactly what I'm worried about. This isn't something you can control. But the aliens were already initiating their experiment. The chamber before them hummed with energy as they attempted to artificially generate the quantum frequency they'd discovered in human consciousness. Hayes felt the familiar prickle at the back of her neck, the one that had always warned her when something was about to go wrong. "Frequency match achieved," announced one of the alien technicians, beginning perception shift in 3, 2. The lights flickered. Hayes' watch stopped completely. 1. For a moment, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The chamber's walls began to ripple like water. Space itself seemed to fold in ways that made Hayes' eyes hurt. And through those folds came things. Things that human minds had learned over millennia to process safely, but that the aliens were experiencing raw and unfiltered. "Shutdown," Zix 427 screamed as its containment suit flared with panic patterns. "Shut down now." But the equipment wasn't responding. The aliens had succeeded in opening their perception to the frequency, but they had none of the natural defenses humans had evolved over countless generations. Hayes watched in horror as shapes emerged from the rippling air. Not the familiar ghosts and spirits she was used to, but something older. Something that existed in the spaces between spaces, that humanity had learned to glimpse only in dreams and shadows. "Everyone out," she commanded, falling back on skills her grandmother had taught her. "I need salt, iron, and anything that can create a circle. Move." The alien researchers fled in panic as their carefully controlled experiment spiraled into chaos. Only Zix 427 remained, its containment suit fluctuating wildly as it tried to process what it was seeing. Hayes grabbed the alien researcher, dragging it back as something that looked like a tear in reality itself began to widen. "This is why we tell ghost stories," she shouted over the rising chaos. "They're not just stories. They're instruction manuals passed down through generations." Working quickly, she began laying down the protective circles her grandmother had taught her about. Principles of quantum barrier creation that humanity had wrapped in folklore and superstition, but that were absolutely real. The symbols, Zix 427 observed through its terror, they're creating coherent quantum boundaries. Protection circles, Hayes corrected, completing the final ring just as the tear in reality grew large enough to reveal what waited beyond. Humanity's first line of defense against exactly this kind of situation. For one eternal moment, both human and alien stood at the edge of perception itself, gazing into spaces that science had never been meant to quantify. Hayes felt an ancient understanding pass between her and whatever waited in that tear. The same understanding countless humans had reached before her. With a sound like reality itself sighing, the tear began to close. The shapes retreated. Hayes' watch began ticking forward again. In the aftermath, as emergency systems finally engaged and the chamber returned to normal, Zix 427 turned to Hayes with its lights pulsing in a pattern she'd never seen before. "Your ghost stories," it said quietly. "They're not about the dead at all, are they? They're about teaching your young how to survive contact with whatever's on the other side," Hayes finished, checking her protective circles. "Humanity didn't just evolve alongside the supernatural. We evolved because of it. Those who learned to handle it survived. Those who didn't." She left the sentence unfinished, but Zix 427 understood. The alien researcher looked at its ruined equipment, then back at Hayes' simple circles of salt and iron. "Perhaps," it suggested, "it is time we learn to listen to your stories more carefully." The Galactic Council's emergency session was being broadcast across thousands of worlds, but Dr. Hayes could only focus on the small figure playing in the corner of the observation deck. Tommy, the groundskeeper's son, was having an animated conversation with someone, or something, that even she couldn't see. "The humans must be contained," the Regillian representative's translated voice boomed through the chamber. "Their very existence threatens the fabric of reality. Containment is impossible," Zix 427 countered, its lights pulsing with determination. "They've evolved alongside these phenomena for millennia. The frequency is part of their genetic makeup. Hayes watched as Tommy's invisible companion apparently taught him a new game involving complex patterns of light that seemed to bend in impossible ways. She learned something profound about these imaginary friends that human children so often had, something that made even her scientific mind reel. Dr. Hayes, the council leader, addressed her directly. Our research indicates that human children are particularly susceptible to these interactions. Can you explain this? She stood, her grandmother's watch heavy in her pocket. What you call susceptibility, we call natural development. We've discovered that human children's imaginary friends are actually interdimensional beings that have been guiding our species' evolution since before we learned to make fire. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Tommy giggled as his invisible companion apparently did something amusing with gravity. These beings, Hayes continued over the uproar, chose us. They recognized something in our earliest ancestors, a potential that no other species had. They've been teaching us, generation by generation, how to perceive and interact with aspects of reality that your science says are impossible. And you allow this? A horrified council member demanded. You let these entities interact with your young. Allow. Hayes smiled as Tommy created a perfect fractal pattern in the air, guided by unseen hands. They're the reason humanity survived our darkest ages. Every culture's stories of guardian angels, spirit guides, protective spirits. They're all talking about the same things. The beings that saw our potential and decided to help us grow into it. Zix 427's research data flashed across the chamber's displays. Human brainwave patterns, quantum frequency analyses, recordings of children like Tommy casually bending reality in ways that should be impossible. The implications are staggering, another council member mused. If what you say is true, humanity isn't just accidentally perceiving these phenomena. We're being deliberately taught. Hayes finished. Every ghost story, every legend, every unexplained event. They're all part of our education, and we're only beginning to understand the curriculum. The council chamber fell silent as Tommy created a miniature galaxy in the air before him, stars spinning in patterns that made several alien observers look away in distress. The question, the council leader finally said, is whether this education represents a threat to the greater galaxy. Hayes thought of her grandmother's last words about the watch, about how it wasn't really broken, just telling time in a way most people couldn't understand yet. She thought of Chuck the poltergeist helping the Anderson children learn to walk, of Elizabeth playing marbles with Tommy across centuries of time. We're not a threat, she declared. We're proof that there's more to reality than your science has discovered. And our teachers, they've been waiting for us to be ready to share what we've learned. As if in response, Tommy's galaxy projection suddenly expanded, filling the chamber with light and motion that somehow felt more real than reality itself. The alien council members watched in a mixture of terror and wonder as humanity's youngest generation demonstrated just how far their education had progressed. Perhaps, Zix 427 suggested into the stunned silence, instead of containing humanity, we should be learning from them. Hayes touched her grandmother's watch, feeling its backwards ticking sync with the pulse of Tommy's created cosmos. That, she said softly, is exactly what our teachers have been preparing us for. The holographic displays in the orbital research station told an impossible story. Dr. Hayes stood surrounded by data from thousands of documented supernatural encounters, each one now revealing a pattern she'd never seen before. It's not just observation, she breathed, watching as Zix 427's advanced analytics highlighted connections across centuries of human experience. We've been actively shaping these phenomena all along. The alien researchers' containment suit pulsed with excitement. Every ghost story, every unexplained event, they're not just encounters. They're evidence of humanity unconsciously manipulating quantum reality. The revelation had come from analyzing Tommy's abilities alongside historical records. Every culture's supernatural experiences, every religious miracle, every inexplicable event, They all showed the same quantum signature that Tommy produced when playing with his interdimensional companions. "The beings teaching your children," Zix 427 explained. "Manipulating the holographic data, they're not just showing them how to perceive reality. They're teaching them how to change it." Hayes watched as the analysis displayed a steady increase in human quantum manipulation abilities over thousands of years. "But why can't most adults do what Tommy does?" "Because you forgot how." The new voice came from Dr. Weber, who entered the lab holding a tablet displaying brain scan data. "Look at this. Children's brains show the same quantum frequency patterns as our most documented supernatural hotspots. But as we age, we're taught to stop believing," Hayes finished, remembering how her own childhood abilities had faded, except for the subtle ones her grandmother had helped her maintain. Society conditions us to ignore these capabilities. Zix 427's lights flickered with what Hayes now recognized as scientific epiphany. Yet some humans maintain limited abilities into adulthood. You're ghost hunters, mediums, sensitive individuals. They're not frauds or anomalies. They're the ones who never completely forgot. Hayes agreed, thinking of her grandmother's lessons. "And now we know why our teachers have been so patient with us. They're waiting for us to remember." The station's instruments suddenly registered a massive spike in quantum activity. In the center of the lab, reality seemed to fold in on itself, creating a window through which Hayes could see possibilities, infinite variations of human development, each one showing what might happen when humanity fully awakened to its potential. "Remarkable," Zix 427 whispered as its instruments tried to process the display. "Your species isn't just learning to observe quantum phenomena. You're evolving into beings who can consciously manipulate the fabric of reality itself." Hayes watched as Tommy entered the lab, accompanied by several shimmering distortions that her enhanced perception now recognized as their ancient teachers. The boy casually reached out and adjusted the holographic display, revealing layers of data that even the alien technology hadn't detected. "They say we're almost ready," Tommy announced with the simple directness of a child. "That's why they let you find us." He gestured to Zix 427. "They knew we'd need help understanding the science part." The alien researcher's containment suit pulsed with patterns Hayes had never seen before, joy mixed with terror mixed with profound awe. "Your teachers, they orchestrated first contact." Tommy nodded, playing with quantum strings of reality like they were cat's cradle strings. "Humans learn better when we can explain stuff to others. Teaching you helps us understand ourselves." Hayes looked at her grandmother's watch, understanding at last why it had never worked normally. It wasn't broken. It was counting down to something. Humanity's next evolutionary step. "We need to tell the Council," she said, watching as Tommy casually rearranged probability fields like building blocks. "They need to understand that humanity isn't a threat to reality." "No," Zix 427 agreed, its lights pulsing with newfound understanding. "You're its next guardians, and we've arrived just in time to witness your awakening." Above them, through the station's viewport, Earth glowed like a blue jewel, a cradle of consciousness where humanity had been slowly, carefully taught to become something new, something that could bridge the gap between science and the supernatural, between the possible and the impossible. The watch ticked backwards in Hayes' pocket, counting down to the moment when humanity would finally remember how to change the world. The Galactic Council chamber had been transformed. Reality rippled around its edges as hundreds of human children, gathered from across Earth, demonstrated what they'd always been capable of doing. Dr. Hayes stood beside Zix 427, watching as humanity's potential unfolded before the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds. "Time isn't just moving backwards anymore," Hayes said, holding up her grandmother's watch. The hands now spun in impossible patterns, creating fractal designs in the air. "It's moving in every direction at once." Tommy stepped forward, surrounded by a shimmer of interdimensional beings now visible to everyone present. The aliens' terror had given way to wonder as they witnessed children casually restructuring quantum fields, communication with beings from beyond conventional spacetime, and manipulating reality in ways their science had claimed impossible. "We understand now," the council leader announced, its translated voice carrying a note of humility that seemed to reshape the very air. Humanity wasn't an accident or an anomaly. "We were an experiment," Hayes completed the thought, finally understanding her grandmother's cryptic final lessons. One that's been running since the first humans looked up at the stars and imagined more than they could see. Zix-427's containment suit pulsed with colors that represented equations beyond normal mathematics. "Your teachers chose well. While we were mastering the physical universe, humanity was learning to transcend it." Around them, children played games that rewrote probability, created spaces between spaces, and spoke with beings that existed in dimensions science had yet to name. But it was more than just power. There was a joy to it, a natural harmony that showed how ready humanity had become. "The ghost stories," Hayes explained to the assembled council. "The legends, the unexplained phenomena. They were never about haunting us. They were about teaching us to see beyond the veil, to understand that reality is more flexible than we imagined." Tommy giggled as he created a miniature universe in his hands, complete with evolving life and consciousness. "They say it's time," he announced, his voice carrying echoes of ancient wisdom. "Time for everyone to remember." And with those words, something shifted. Hayes felt it first in her watch, then in her mind, then in the very fabric of existence around them. Across Earth, humans of all ages began to remember what their children had never forgotten: how to see beyond the ordinary, how to touch the extraordinary. "Your species," the council leader observed with awe, "has become the bridge between conventional science and something else entirely. The question is, what happens now?" Hayes watched as Tommy and the other children began teaching the alien representatives the same lessons their interdimensional teachers had been sharing with humanity for millennia. The barriers between species, between science and supernatural, between possible and impossible, were dissolving. "Now," she said, feeling her own childhood abilities awakening anew, "we teach others what we've learned, just as we were taught." She created a simple light pattern in the air, one that her grandmother had shown her long ago. "The universe is ready for more than just physics and mathematics. It's ready for wonder." Zix-427 reached out tentatively and, with Tommy's guidance, adjusted the pattern Hayes had created, adding new dimensions of possibility. "Perhaps," the alien researcher suggested, "this is why the universe evolved consciousness in the first place, to do more than observe reality. To participate in it," Hayes finished, watching as humans and aliens alike began to explore the new possibilities together. Her grandmother's watch had stopped moving entirely now. It had served its purpose as a countdown to this moment. Above them, beyond the council chamber's transparent dome, the galaxy spun in its eternal dance. But now, for the first time, its witnesses could see all the layers of reality that had always existed alongside the physical universe. The ghosts and spirits, the interdimensional teachers, the quantum possibilities, all coming together as humanity stepped into its role as guardians of something far greater than mere reality. The experiment was complete. The lessons had been learned. And somewhere, in dimensions beyond counting, humanity's ancient teachers smiled as their students began to share what they had learned with the rest of the cosmos.